Welcome to yet another episode of Alt Swift X's Game of Thrones Abridged. This one's a good one. We are reading a good chapter today, ladies and gentlemen. This chapter is a Bran chapter, and it's a scene that we didn't get to see in the show, which is a shame because it's a good one. So currently Bran is bedridden, broken, fallen, damaged. He's crippled, he's in a coma after his fall from the tower, after he was pushed by Jaime Lannister. And in this chapter we get an insight into his mind, into his brain box, while his body lies dormant. And some cool shit happens. So it begins by telling us that Bran feels like he's falling. He's been falling for years, it feels like. And while he falls, there is a voice in his head, a voice whispering in the darkness. And this voice is the voice of Bloodraven, the three-eyed crow. And he's falling. Bran is falling. He sees the ground far, far below him. And he's so high up that he can barely even see the ground, but he's falling. And he reminds himself that when you dream that you're falling in dreams, you always wake up before you hit the ground. It's okay, because he'll wake up before he hits the ground. But the voice in his head says, but what if you don't? And he keeps falling, and the ground is getting closer, and he describes how it's cold, and he describes how it's dark, and the voice in his head tells him to fly. And Bran, the confused, terrified, dreaming boy, is crying and terrified, and he's saying, I can't fly, I can't. And then the voice says, how do you know you can't fly? Have you ever tried to fly? And so what Bloodraven is trying to do is he's trying to activate Bran's latent mutant genes. He's trying to open his third eye. He's trying to give him psychic wings to fly. He's trying to give him the psychic shenanigan powers. That's what he's trying to do. But it's interesting that line, have you ever tried to fly, that echoes something that Euron Greyjoy later says in Feast. Euron Greyjoy says something about maybe I can fly. How would I know? I'd have to step out of a tower. I'd have to leap from some tall tower, and that's the only way I could really know if I can fly. How do we know if we don't leap? So it's very interesting that very similar sentiments is said by Euron Greyjoy, echoing Bloodraven. Some people take that as evidence that Bloodraven and Euron Greyjoy are secretly working together. I think that's unlikely, but in any case, currently, Bloodraven's trying to talk to Bran. And Bran is falling. And at the same time that he's falling and terrified and this sort of magical battle is happening, the crow, who is the dream embodiment of Bloodraven. This scene is just like when Morpheus and Neo are talking inside the Matrix, and Morpheus is explaining the Matrix to Neo and trying to open his power box. This is like that, except there's this sort of element of absurdity added. When the crow says, say, got any corn? So at the same time that he is Bloodraven, he's also a raven, who, just like Mormont's raven, is sort of annoyingly demanding food. But anyway, so they're falling, there's corn involved. George Martin always finds a way to get food into it. He always sneaks it in. Bloody scoundrel. But they're falling, and the crow says, you've got to fly, you have wings. And Bran touches his back and his shoulders, and he's like, I don't have wings, but Bloodraven's like, you don't get the analogy, you prick, you fucking child, you don't understand the metaphor here. The wings are your psychic energon beams, they're your mind-opening four-dimensional rays, they're your psychic powers, bro. But of course, being a mystical mentor, Bloodraven can't just say that outright. Of course, that'd be like if Gandalf said, the melting point of the One Ring is this many degrees Celsius, and jet fuel doesn't melt One Rings. You've got to take it to Mount Doom, and we'll take the Eagles. The Eagles will fly us, and you can just drop it into none of that. magical mentors always have to be vague, you know? That's part of the job description. And anyway, so Bran's falling, and then a memory comes to Bran's mind. He remembers a golden figure, a golden face, saying, "The things I do for love." And of course, that is what Jaime, golden-haired Jaime, said before pushing Bran from the tower. So Bran is remembering the person who pushed him, the person who caused his accident, the horror and the shock and the violence of it. But then Bloodraven, the crow, when Bran remembers this, the crow says, "You forget that. You do not need it now. Put it aside. Put it away." And the crow pecks at Bran until the shining golden face is gone. Bloodraven edited Bran's memories. Bloodraven used the Men in Black flashy memorator to remove the memory of Jaime pushing Bran from Bran's memories. How fucked up is that? I mean, sure, it saves Bran from trauma, but I mean, I don't think that was Bloodraven's intention. I think Bloodraven does not have Bran's best interests at heart. I think the simple reason Bloodraven removed that memory was because it was a distraction from Bloodraven's goal of using Bran as a psychic thing. I don't think Bloodraven really cares about Bran, but regardless, that's the explanation as for why Bran doesn't remember that Jaime pushed him. If Bran did remember that when he woke up from his coma, things could have played out very differently. Bran could have told Robb that, "Yo, the Lannisters fucking tried to murder me." And then Robb could have told Ned, and then the whole Lannister-Stark conflict, I mean, maybe it would have been similar, but it's surely different in some ways. Anyway, so Bloodraven mind alters Bran, highly unethical, and then they keep falling, and the crow's like, you gotta fly, and then while they're falling, Bran starts to see the lands below him, and he talks about how the whole world is spread out beneath him, and he can see everything so clearly. So, and again, there's this whole motif of how Bran's arc is about seeing and knowing, vision, which is of course connected to what his psychic powers can do and what Bloodraven's trying to do. So he can see the whole world, and he looks at Winterfell, and he sees the people in Winterfell. He sees Maester Luwin, and he sees Robb looking taller and stronger because of course Robb's sort of becoming a man at this point in the story, and he sees Hodor, and he sees the weirwood in the Gods' Wood, the red-leafed weirwood, that tree of the old gods, which seems to be the source of Bran's psychic powers. And he sees Catelyn on the ship going south towards King's Landing at the moment. He sees Ned. He sees Arya. He sees Arya silent, holding her secrets hard in her heart. He also sees Jon. Also Jon at the wall, slowly forgetting what warmth feels like. Oh, and Bran also sees some figures, some really vaguely described figures. He sees someone who's armored like the sun, golden and beautiful, and he sees a giant in stone armor who behind his visor has only darkness and thick black blood. And there are a lot of different theories about who these figures represent. Oh, and there's also another one, a shadow who is dark with the terrible face of a hound. So that hound-faced shadow is presumably Sandor Clegane the Hound. The golden figure could be Jaime, golden and beautiful, but because he's armored like the sun, some people think that might possibly refer to like Oberyn Martell as another possibility. Whereas the stone giant, made of darkness and thick blood, is usually believed to be Robert Strong, the reanimated Gregor Clegane, the Mountain. But yeah, there are still lots of different interpretations of these lines, and it's still a little unclear to see their meaning. But personally, I doubt that there's a simple, clear answer that like I don't think there'll be a revelation later on that makes this vision make more sense, because this is such an early chapter, and so much of the early foreshadowing in this first book doesn't play out exactly as intended, because George Martin has changed so much about the series as it's gone on. So I doubt this has any like super specific meaning that's super applicable to the current series. But anyway, Bran's falling. but he's also looking. So he looks out to the east, and he sees the free cities of Essos. He sees Vase Dothrak. He sees a shy by the shadow, where dragons stir beneath the sunrise. That's cool. Ashai is, of course, this deeply mysterious, shadowy place in the far, 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 far east. And it's interesting to get what seems to be here confirmation that there are dragons living in Ashai before even Dany's dragons hatched. Maybe that's metaphorical in some sense, but maybe not. Maybe there straight up are dragons not extinct living in the far, far east. That probably won't become relevant in any way, but it's interesting dragon trivia for your next dragon pub trivia night. That'll come in handy. But yeah, so Bran also looks north, and he looks at the wall where Jon is forgetting what warmth feels like, and then Bran looks beyond the wall, past the lands beyond the wall, through the ice, through the frozen shore. He looks to the curtain of light at the end of the world, and then he looks beyond that curtain, and he looks deep into the heart of winter, and he cries out, afraid, and tears burn on his cheeks because he sees the heart of winter. What the fuck is the heart of winter? I don't know, but it sounds important. And then Bloodraven says, now you know why you must live. Why, Bran says? Because winter is coming. Isn't that dope? So it doesn't tell us exactly what the threat is, but presumably this is something to do with the White Walkers. This is like the central core of the spookiness of the others and the winter and that whole mystical, magical, terrible thing. The Great Other is what Melisandre talks about, supposedly the god in opposition to R'hllor. But we don't really know what it means. But Bran goes on and he talks about how he looks down, and down he sees cold and snow and death, and he sees a wasteland with white-blue spires of ice, like stalagmites pointing up, these spikes, and upon these spikes like spears, he sees the bones of 1,000 other dreamers impaled. Isn't that fucking cool? So there are thousands of like dead people, or at least figures, or at least remains, far, far, far in the far, far north, who seem to be other dreamers, Bran says. So are these other people who have had psychic powers, who have tried to penetrate into the far north and the cold, but have been somehow killed or fallen or failed? Is that what this is? Are these other students of Bloodraven? Are these other people who Bloodraven has tried to train to be the Three-Eyed Crow or what the fuck ever, but who have failed? Who are these others, and is Bran in danger of suffering the same fate of being impaled upon the spikes at the end of the world by the heart of winter? I don't fucking know, but it sounds pretty cool, I think. So there's terrible knowledge, there's Three Eyes, there's bravery, and Bran is still falling, and the ground is rushing up towards him now. And Bloodraven is saying, fly, Bran, fly or die. Choose to fly or die. And then Bran, looking at the death screaming up at him from below, Bran spreads his wings and flies. So he activates his psychic fucking powers. And then he flies up, and he talks about how it's so great to fly. He says it's even better than climbing, which is nice sort of compensation. He can no longer climb, but he does have the psychic powers. Some people have criticized how this whole thing of Bran getting crippled but then gaining psychic powers, some people have criticized that as like perpetuating like a stereotype or like a oft-repeated story in fiction of the idea that if someone gets a disability, they also get magic powers, so it's okay, they're still a human being because look, they have magic powers, but it's an unrealistic or toxic or bad portrayal of disability. I'm not really one to express this particular concern, but it's an interesting argument. Anyway, so he's flying. He's flying, and Bloodraven's like, "Yep, you sure are flying, A+." And then he pecks at Bran's forehead, and Bran's like, "What the fuck? What's going on?" But what the Bloodraven is doing is he's opening Bran's third eye on his forehead, his psychic third eye. And then Bloodraven has opened his psychic powers, and then around that moment, Bran wakes up. He's back in the room in Winterfell, and he scares the shit out of this serving woman who's like carrying some water in there. And she screams, he's awake, he's awake, he's awake. And so everyone's like, holy shit, Bran's awake. And so Rob's heading up to the bed. But Bran is awake. He's back in the land of the living after like weeks of like wasting away in his bed, no one knowing if he's gonna live or die. Apparently, Bran has been fighting this fucking psychic battle the whole time, presumably, right? I mean, he said he feels like he's been falling for years. So Bran's been having some fucking metaphysical last-level struggles in the time while everyone else has been doing their shit. But anyway, so Bran's awake, and Bran notices that his legs are numb, which would be horrifying. Of course, he's paralyzed from the waist down now. Do you think he can poop on his own? I hope so. I don't know. Anyway, so he's awake, and his direwolf Summer comes up. He hasn't named him Summer yet, but anyway, so his direwolf's on the bed, and then Rob bursts into the room and he's like, holy shit, my brother's alive, is awake. And then Bran says simply to Rob that his direwolf's name is Summer. He names his direwolf Summer, which is super fucking cool. So part of the meaning of that name, Summer, then surely reflects what Bran has just experienced with regards to winter. So Bloodraven has just shown Bran the profound mystical threat that lies in the far, far north, in the heart of winter. And says that you must live so that you can presumably, face or oppose this wintry threat. So it's quite appropriate that Bran has called his direwolf Summer to represent an opposition and a beam of hope and warmth against the dark and cold and evil. But also, it's really cool to get this chapter because it gives us so much insight into like what Bloodraven is about and what this whole psychic magic shit is about in Bran's arc, which in the show is so much more difficult to follow. In the show, they have like a few sequences where Bran's like following a three-eyed raven around Winterfell and stuff, which is like, okay, cool, but it doesn't really... It's a bit more vague and it's a bit harder to follow what's going on. It would have been really cool if they did some kind of sequence in the show which represented this. But in any case, it's a really cool chapter, and it kicks off Bran's mystical journey as a Frodo Baggins under the wing of this Bloodraven Gandalf, except unlike Gandalf, Bloodraven is oft associated with darkness and corpsiness. I mean, his house is littered with skulls. Bloodraven, unlike Gandalf, is perhaps not a purely good mystical mentor. So it'll be very interesting to see how, in Winds and Beyond, the relationship, magical and otherwise, develops between Bran and Bloodraven, and what Bran's fate may be in the future when he faces the heart of winter. So thanks for listening. I thought that chapter was really cool. Comment below if you thought that chapter was really cool. And we'll have more episodes in the future. Cheers.